The boss of Britain's biggest insurance group has already had to pack his bags and trouser a massive payoff after shareholders said they wouldn't put up with his latest pay package. Bosses of two other businesses have also been forced out. Now what's been nicknamed the shareholder spring is going to get legal backing. Among the laws the coalition says it'll introduce is one which will give shareholders power to block top pay awards. It's the Business Secretary Vince Cable's baby, and we'll hear from him in a moment. First, Joe Lynham reports.
Why discolour your hair when you can soft colour it?
30 years ago, an advertising slogan became synonymous with a new generation of self-pampering.
And I'm worth it.
And it might just as easily be the catchphrase for top executives all around the world. Back in the early 1980s, the ratio of a chief executive's pay to that of the average salary in that company was around 30-1. Now it's around 110-1. And that's nothing. The ratio in the United States is close to 500-1.
What we saw in the 1980s was the rise of the generation I've called the L'Oreal generation, because they got it because they were worth it, they deserved it. And they came into power at a time of massive change where post-Big Bang, high-risk businesses were taken into bigger businesses where the risk went on the balance sheet but the rewards stayed with the individual. And they came into business at a time, on top of that, when people like McKinsey were talking about the war for talent. They blessed the very top of organisations. These were the elect, the people you had to pay the most and retain for the longest.
But just as the stock market crash on Black Monday in 1987 burst the then bubble, the financial crisis of 4 years ago has acted like a retreating tide, revealing those swimmers not wearing any trunks. Last year, 60 FTSE 100 chief executives saw their typical pay packages rise by 11% to £3.6 million. But in the same year, total pay for the economy as a whole rose by a mere 1.1% to a more modest average salary of around £25,000. All the while, the benchmark FTSE 100 index fell by 6.6%. Suddenly, the owners of big companies, i.e. their shareholders, have realised they are losing money hand over fist, while the people they employ to prevent that are coining it. And with AGM season upon us, fund managers who manage pension pots for millions of us have suddenly had a smell the coffee moment. Some of their votes against generous remuneration packages for top execs have claimed high-profile scalps, such as Trinity Mirror's Sly Bailey, AstraZeneca's David Brennan and Andrew Moss from the insurance giant Aviva. There have also been warning shots across the bows for Barclays' Bob Diamond and William Hill boss Ralph Topping. And the week is but young.
Loves to hate, which is...
But just like other fads from the 1980s, could this recent shareholder spring last no longer than hula hoops or executive toys?
No, I don't think it's the hula hoop of corporate governance. You know, we're entering a world of accountability now. Social media are one of the big factors that really drive this. And I just don't think there's any turning back.
Business Secretary Vince Cable wants to force big shareholders to take binding votes when it comes to remuneration, not mere advisory ones. He hopes that by making votes on executive pay compulsory, it will force top bosses to either work harder or earn less.
Believe it or not, UK shareholders already have quite an amount of power, but they don't tend to use it. They could fire the chairman of the Remuneration Committee, which sets executive pay, but they usually don't. They could vote against the share plan for the chief executive, but they usually don't. And they could even throw all their toys out of the pram and get rid of the entire board. But how often does that happen? So if you make executive pay votes binding from now on, which is the plan, will that even change anything?
If they ask us to vote on complex bonus plans and share options, we'll all throw our hands up in horror and follow the board. If they ask us to vote on setting a limit over which someone cannot earn, i.e. a multiple of X of the middle or the bottom of the rest of employees, then I think there's a chance that it really will have an impact, because we as shareholders can set the maximum minimum, if you like, that we're prepared to accept people taking away.
While capitalism was alive and well in the 1980s, it faces something of a crisis these days in Western Europe. Ironically, there are no such doubts in emerging giants such as Brazil, India or China. They're rich today, but were considered third world countries 3 decades ago. maybe they'll start worrying about executive pay in 2042.
Joe Linen. Well, a little earlier I visited Vince Cable's office in Westminster. Vince Cable, the other day you referred to ludicrous levels of top executive pay in relation to performance. What did you have in mind?
Well, I had in mind the fact that, as is now being identified by large numbers of shareholder groups, there is a lot of dissatisfaction with, I think, two different things. One is pay getting way out of line with performance, and the other is most executives trying to get into the top quartile, which by definition they can't. So there's been a kind of pay escalation. And you know, the concept of ludicrous, this has actually been identified by the shareholders themselves. We've seen a rebellion in the last
but it's
few
your
weeks.
word. It's your word. I just wondered what examples you were thinking of.
Well, you've seen the examples of the last few days of, William Hill a few weeks ago, Barclays, others, executives.
You think Bob Diamond's paid too much?
Well, that's certainly what his shareholders thought, and they've
It's
taken action
your word,
on it.
ludicrous. Do you think Bob Diamond was paid a ludicrous amount of money?
I have my views, but my views are not important. As a government minister, what is important for me is that we have the right set of rules, so that the people who own Bob Diamond's company can vote on whether they think his pay is too high or too little.
60% of them thought his pay was fine.
Well, a lot didn't. Of course, there's also a lot of absentee votes, but there was a sufficient number to cause serious alarm, and I think this is happening across.
But if there's a majority who think his pay is all right, then it's all right, isn't it?
That's up to the company itself to decide. If the chief executives and the directors of the company in particular feel that there is a strong expression of dissatisfaction amongst the people who own their own companies, they're likely to react to it, and this is exactly what we've seen. It's healthy, this is shareholder democracy, this is the way companies should be held to account, and my job is to set the rules.
Absolutely.
And we're reinforcing...
That's why your views matter, of course.
We're reinforcing the views of the shareholders by introducing legislation to give them a vote that's binding and not merely advisory.
But the majority view of the shareholders in that case was that he was entitled to this, what you consider, extravagant amount of money. Now, if they decide that, what business is it of yours?
It isn't my business. It's their business decide what they want to do with their company.
So what's an adequate majority?
The question about whether it should be a 50% or not is an issue that we will resolve when we come to the issue of the bind. Well, I have suggested that there's a strong argument for going over 50%, but there are arguments for 50, 75, 70, 60, or even remaining at 50. And what we're doing at the moment is talking to the investor community and business about what would be a sensible figure to judge a binding vote by.
For you, this isn't really a question of performance of the companies. It's a moral question, isn't it?
It is about the performance of companies, actually. I may have moral views about particular executives.
The company performs spectacularly well. The chief executive can be spectacularly rewarded, can't he?
Yes, actually, that's right. Unless there is a direct public interest.
You don't see it as a moral issue, then?
I may have moral views, but my job as a government minister is to create a framework of corporate governance under which the people who own companies exercise their responsibility and do so effectively.
When a Conservative backbench Today MP describes your prejudices on this matter as being liberal left-wing claptrap, what do you think?
Well, that's frankly way out of line with the majority of opinion I'm picking up in the business community.
The last time I had the pleasure of being in this building, I came in, I asked you if you knew what the slogan was down in reception. You couldn't remember, and why should you? It was some dreary thing about cutting red tape. But I see that it's gone now.
No,
there's no slogan downstairs about cutting red tape.
There are lots of slogans downstairs about Great Britain.
Indeed, there are lots and lots and lots of statements of various degrees of vacuity or meaning.
Right.
But the one about cutting red tape is no longer there. Now, this particular measure is going to introduce a whole lot more red tape, isn't it?
No, it won't introduce red tape.
How can it not?
Well, how will it? The idea that people who are shareholders are entitled to exercise a vote that's binding doesn't require a lot of regulation. As I say, I've just been talking to the investor community, who are the people who will be using these powers. Not a single one of them raised the objection that it would create more red tape. That's not the issue, actually, in this particular areas of policy.
Just one final point. It's your birthday. Happy birthday. We'll draw a veil over how old
Please,
you are.
thank you.
I just wonder there. I mean, may you have many years to come, but when you think about retirement, I suppose you'll be able to retire to the House of Lords, because it'll still be there by the time you get around to it, won't it?
Well, the proposal of the government is it will still be there, but it will be elected. Whether I feel like seeking election in my advanced years is a different question.